Welcome to the Hard Boiled Software Podcast, a regular conversation series featuring system thinkers in software engineering, architecture, product development, and design. I'm your host, Dave Larrabee, and today I'm joined by Michael Feathers. If you've ever inherited a code base that made you question your career choices, you probably know his book, Working Effectively with Legacy Code. It's been the survival guide for developers untangling gnarly, untested code bases for 2 decades plus now. For me, the book really changed my career. It's an absolute banger, and if you haven't read it, you should check it out. Michael's continued his work helping orgs and teams maintain and create better systems through his company, R7K Research and Conveyance. So be sure to check out the links in the show notes. Michael and I crossed paths in the software development conference circuit some time ago. I always enjoyed our conversations and see them as a kind of prototype for what we're trying to do with this podcast. So, perfect candidate for this episode. Thank you, Michael, for being our first guest. So we pulled up and chatted about what's happening to our profession right now. Because the amount of change in our space is, well, kind of ridiculous right now. It's kind of equal parts anxiety-inducing and exciting. Right? So we talked about the dopamine hit of programming, the rush you get from solving problems in code, and whether AI changes or redirects that energy. We also dig into professional identity and what happens when skills that you've invested years in start getting commoditized. We explore the second order effects of AI in organization, and this is stuff people are just starting to think and even maybe feel a little bit right now. And we speculate on the big question right now for programmers. What skills remain evergreen and what's actually going away? This one gets a little philosophical at times, but in a nice practical way. I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I did. On to episode 1, Michael Feathers. Today we want to kind of talk about professional identity and skills evolution in this, I don't know, feels like the craziest time to me. I mean, crazy in like the amount of change is nuts. Like for the first time, it's not the best business to be a comp sci major, or you know what I mean? Like it's like all these rifts going on and the contraction in the industry and paradigm changes and our, skills that we had invested in being kind of commoditized. It's just a lot of change. Think like, the industry's finally collectively wisened up to the fact that big agile frameworks don't work. There's a ton of shakeup that's like affecting people. And some of that's like pretty, like, I'm like, welcome to the party. And some of it's like kind of scary, but, we just kind of want to talk about what it means to us. I think like we came of age in the programming era, like where it was like being a programmer, and crafts and principles and patterns and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I love that stuff. I hope it doesn't all go away. I hope it doesn't all just become like, vinyl collecting, but things are changing and we want to kind of make this episode conversational and just kind of talk about these topics of professional identity and skills evolution. So
yeah. It's kind of funny with this too, because I've been thinking an awful lot about what programming is, in relation to this topic about. And it's funny, I think back to an experience I had when I was like a junior programmer, like my first major job, I guess, in the industry. And I worked for this guy named Dave. And it's like, I went around to his cubicle and I saw that he was doing by hand this particular tedious operation. He was doing it over and over and over again. So I just kind of leapt back to my cubicle and just basically coded up a little script and emailed it to him. So here, this will just do it for you. And it's like, wasn't, insulted or anything like that, but I talked to his, co-manager and he says, why'd you send that to Dave? He loves doing that stuff. It's kind of like he loves basically doing that thing. Right. And I think that with programming, the thing that's so cool is it's kind of like a bit of a dopamine rush. Basically, you find a problem and you get closure on it once you actually sort of get rendered to code and you feel confident in it being right. And we're confronted with all these little problems that we can solve. And then the bigger ones come sporadically and we get a bigger rush out of solving those. So it's like a great flow state to be in, I think. And so it makes me wonder now with, with AI, just really whether we find something, comparable to that. Who knows,
Yeah, I think it, in my experience, like I have gotten a rush from AI and, granted, mostly what I'm doing is qualitative and the evals, like I'm not doing, math, with LLMs. It will occasionally do like proposal math
Mhm.
for me, and it's getting better. But I just haven't outsourced that. I'm just fine with a Google sheet. Like it's money, so I want to check it all.
Yeah, makes sense.
Um, but it is like my proposal workflow, which is a total liberal arts workflow, and we do, five or six of the same things in different unique combinations for different clients. And so writing
Mhm.
those proposals, SOWs, like I've got a great Claude project trained to do that. And now it's like 10, 15 minutes to get 90% of the way there. And then I hand tune it because it does make mistakes. There's still human in the loop, and but it is, I just feel stoked every time it saves me those 3 or 4 hours of hand
Yeah.
doing it. Um, I kind of feel a little bit as a self-taught. I mean, saying self-taught is the wrong thing. I've been taught by a lot of people, including yourself, indirectly how to program good, through books and community and stuff like that. But like being more of a bootstrapped kind of engineer, um, which is putting it generously, I do, in a liberal arts trained, educated person, I feel a little like I've been on this tip for, that English and communication and these kind of soft skills really do matter. And it's not a new thing. It's like Conway's Law, right? How do committees event in 1968. So I feel a little, I don't know what, it's not Schadenfreude, but a little more like smug, maybe told you so about it. But that said, I know exactly what you're feeling about that dopamine hit. And like, especially when you do like these kind of, we're all like, a lot of us are like test driven people. You get it
Yeah.
very frequently and repetitively because you're in this constant flow uh, loop. I haven't quite gotten the same thing, I would say, out of the LLM usage, but close. I mean, here and there,
Yeah. Yeah,
glimpses.
I'm kind of here and there with that. And it's funny. I think for me, the thing that I spend more time thinking about and doing really is just kind of like figuring out exactly what to ask, right? And then basically learning how to integrate what I'm learning with what I'm writing as code and which things I feel comfortable generating and which things I don't, that kind of thing. So in a way, it feels a lot more like debugging or problem exploration in a way, which is kind of cool for me because it's kind of like I just really am a very curious person. So it's kind of like I always look at programming as having this thing of like, there's two questions. The first question is, what does this thing do now? And the second question is, what do I want it to do? What is it supposed to do? Right. And it's kind of using AI as a tool to basically sort of like, you know, get feedback as you're trying to go and ascertain those things. It's kind of powerful, at least, from my experience.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it seems like there's a pendulum swinging back to planning, and whereas I think a lot of us, from the object, and it kind of I feel like shifted a little bit in the functional paradigm as that kind of took off, where there was a little bit more emphasis on, like domain driven design had this like event modeling thing, and
Mhm.
where it was like, okay, we're gonna figure out what it is and then go into delivery mode. I feel like AI workflow wants to be a little bit more like that. Your final product is going to be a really well defined markdown prompt that is, going to get you most of the way there. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't see it happening. Maybe I'm surprised, if that when that does happen with like if you have a fleet of agents that are able to go and basically check each other's work and sort of give you a great deal of confidence. Um, but it seems like, at least from my experience, a lot of this is basically figuring out what size of thing to go and generate, right? And I guess maybe just because of my background, I always want to understand what it's doing and how it does it. So I've basically got to sort of generate chunks that are within the range of my understanding, right? And then you have to go and say, well, is that a class? Is that a service? Is that, what piece, are we trying to go and sort of like tackle at this moment? Um, so I keep thinking about this in terms of modularity. It's kind of like we can take control of modularity, decide what modules we will have in our system, and then basically use AI to augment us in the process of doing this. The thing that I find most scary about AI right now is something that's called availability bias. It's like this notion that essentially, like, well, if I'm going to get a coffee, chances are I'll go to the Starbucks that's at the end of the corner. I'm not going to drive 5 miles to this other coffee place. So I go to Starbucks just because it's closer to me, right? And, when you get AI to give you a solution or something, right? It's kind of like it's very easy to go and just take that and say, okay, well, this looks good to me without having done the thinking about alternatives that's quite necessary. And we know over and over again from, the history of software development that the decisions that we make end up basically being the foundation for the next decisions that we make and ends up becoming very, very path dependent. And then, you can end up in a rabbit hole where it's kind of like you were to undo the work that you've done over the past 5 days, for instance, it's great to have a head start with AI to go and do it over again. But it's like you have that. Yeah, it's just an interesting thing. I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah,
I just
the
cautious about that.
Starbucks analogy really kind of pings this. Like Starbucks is always for me like, do I care about coffee or do I care about caffeine? And usually it's pushing through the sour milk smell of a Starbucks to
Mhm.
get the caffeine. Like Starbucks is not the best, right? But it's available, like you said. There's availability biases. So I think like when it comes to these systems, like it's a similar thing. Do you care about like I wrote down delivery or design or what is the balance of that? Because like
Mhm.
I think we're getting there's a strong tempo right now in specifically enterprise where I work, where it's just like delivery, crush, put it out there, feature factory kind of,
Mhm.
and we know the second order effects of that are, technical debt, system approaching crisis, big ball of mud, hard to reason about these systems kinds of things. I mean, which I don't know, could be pushing the furniture around a little bit in terms of where AI helps. I mean, I think it can help with
Mhm.
ameliorate some of those things, but yeah, it's an interesting one. Cool. Take a second. Let's look at the outline and see where we're at.
Mhm. Cool.
Yeah, clip all this stuff. Okay, let's do the ego death one. So I've here
Sure.
written down navigating ego death as traditional coding skills become less central. This is a bit of a squishy, feely question, but I'm just curious. Have you, as your careers unfolded over decades, like have you had we've chatted about burnout before, but like
Yeah.
has the like when you were production every day putting it out programmer to maybe moving to more of a um I hate these terms, but like influencer or thought leader, but someone that's,
Yeah.
you
Consulting,
know,
just
yeah, consulting essentially, like talking about how to program or telling people how to program. How do you kind of navigate that transition? I wonder if there's like any wisdom we can mine in that, because I think a lot of people are experiencing some form of ego death as coding is diminishing in value.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. And I think I may be like a bit of an anomaly because I've tried to stay close to code all the way through my career, right? And just, I love it. And it's great to go and dig in and try to understand things and try to build things and stuff like this. But, it's funny with this too, because reflecting on it a bit, it seems like, if you love programming, it means that you love understanding systems, right? And you love making systems. And, software systems are not the only systems. There are social systems, there are legal systems, there are economic systems, organizational systems, all these things. And I don't think it's any accident that many programmers end up becoming like great entrepreneurs. They just sort of like dig in and it's kind of like, oh, here's a problem. Let me see if I can fix it. Right. And you do that over and over and over again, and you can basically gain traction in a lot of different fields. So I think that's an interesting thing to go and recognize that it's, you may love programming and that's good, but the part of you that's flexing when you do this is really problem solving. And I think the tough thing with AI is it kind of like it helps you solve problems quickly. And you could even say that it is solving the problems. Um, but, I mean, we have to basically just sort of like, put our stamp on things. We have to go and figure out the right problem to solve. And maybe we move closer to becoming like problem articulators. And I kind of noticed that with prompting. It's kind of like, how do I fashion a prompt to go and get the thing that I want without biasing it towards one particular thing I want to do, right? I end up going and having prompts that are kind of like that. And, what's the scope of what I'm trying to basically get done right now? And I think that's where the art to it is, and that's where the craftsmanship is, the craft
Yeah.
of it. to me, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think like okay, my last really significant like programming task, job was I built an ML system that was like we were building like a startup to do distracted driving detection, and it was firmly machine learning, object classification. There were some technical constraints around using certain kinds of cameras and stuff like that, and it was in Python. Using a bunch of APIs that I think we're using SageMaker, AWS, like, which is like TensorFlow in the cloud kind of stuff, right? Um, and I am very rusty with Python at the time. This is during pandemic, very, um, inexperienced with those particular set of APIs, but I had a goal in mind and I got it done. I got it done. I built it. And the goal wasn't to make it pretty. The goal wasn't to make it, sustainable. The goal was to say, is feasibility. Can we do this? And then can we shop it around and sell it and find someone to buy it? And the answer to the first question was yes. And the answer to the second question was no. But we did it really quickly and didn't waste a lot of time getting
Yeah.
to that negative. So I always kind of come back to, I got into this to build things and to see the kind of outcomes. I think that I got more into sustainability and like as I lived with a system for a longer period of time, I became aware that short-term choices aren't always the best for long-term, like that sustainability, like I said. So, but I still kind of come back to, what is the outcome that I want? And, sometimes it's to say, can it be done? And sometimes it's to say, can we continue to do it over a long period of time at a reasonable cost? And, I don't know. I just think I've never really, I think one thing that's kind of helped me psychologically over the years is this old tweet that that I remember to this day, and it was something I'll paraphrase, and I don't know who did it. I'll try to dig it out and put it into whatever show notes we have here. But um, something like when I hear phrases like React developer, I think of spoon cook or hammer carpenter. Right? We don't really talk about the tools and the person, and there are obviously exceptions. Crane operator, but what brand of crane? I guess. I kind of just think of myself as a developer, engineer, programmer, or whatever anyone
Mhm.
wants to call me. As a someone that will build a thing. So I really like your analogy of as we mature, maybe we go from modules or functions to systems as a whole, and those could be
Mhm.
social and stuff like that. Really resonates with me.
Yeah, it's really, yeah, and I agree. It's kind of like basically seeing people as center on one particular framework or technology. It's kind of like, I haven't really had this conversation too often, but it's kind of like, what are you in this for, right? It's kind of like, what happens when the framework changes, right? What happens when there's another language, that kind of thing. I think some people are just kind of content to basically stay in one particular area and, deep focus, deep specialization. But, the world isn't like that, in many cases. Even people who like electrical engineers basically do very, very deep work, with like design systems and stuff. You can become a specialist at that, but you've got to become enough of a generalist to be able to go and sort of transfer those skills to other things that people do with systems. And I think that's a great frame of mind to have. It's like, okay, what have I learned here? How does this apply in other areas? And, that's where you start to just sort of build your repertoire of skills. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would kind of recommend to um, people that are kind of just getting into the software game and AI software. It's a very radically different, weird kind of software, but it's software. Um, and I was sharing this advice with my 11-year-old nephew, or we occasionally get together and program Roblox games and Lua, and he's really all about it. And he's got a really good head on his shoulder for that age. He's like, Uncle D, I want to learn how to the fundamentals of programming before I rely too heavily on the AI coding assistant because it's built into their IDE or whatever. I'm like, that's great. You should absolutely
It's a
learn
good
that
frame of
stuff.
mind.
Yes,
Yeah.
co-sign that. But I think like the meta of learning how to learn, which is a cliche, but it's really true. Like, what is your algorithm for tackling something new. Like how do you go after something that is radically different, weird, uncomfortable, and coming up with a maybe set of policies or heuristics around that, I think are really important. For me, it's totally like jump in, thrash around, make a mess, cut myself, curse, program in anger, alone, not around
Mhm.
people, that I would offend. And then finally, eventually read the manual. It's like get to the
Yeah,
point
yeah.
where it's like, okay, I should, and I do that every time, but it seems to work. And so I sometimes like say, oh, well, I should have started with the docs, but I often just am more action bias. I don't know. Do you
Yeah, no,
have
it's
you
great.
distilled any kind of strategies for learning?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is to basically sort of like sidestep things a bit. If a problem's too hard, try to pick another problem entirely or another, look for another avenue towards the goal that you have, right? Something I was doing recently, I don't like personal finance software very much. I just think it's kind of, weird and it usually gives you analysis that isn't quite targeted to what you might want to do. So I set myself a project to go and sort of like, build out something that would go and, take like bank statements and credit card statements and stuff like this and sort of give me great plots and all these other things. Right? And it was interesting because one particular institution produces CSV files that are just almost indecipherable, right? So I basically, it not really indecipherable, unparsable, right? So major spreadsheets will parse them and basically be able to let me see them. But in terms of me actually writing like Python code to go and actually get at the data, it just seemed like a bit of a nightmare, right? And so I was basically asking, one of the AI tools to go and basically give me a reader, for this particular thing and gave it examples. And it just said, oh, yeah, well, this is a known thing and such like this. And it gave me this giant, giant Python function. And, it looked like it was basically dealing with all these interesting special cases. And it just didn't work, right? And it's like, how much more do I invest in this particular avenue for this thing, right? And so I thought, okay, let me try something different, right? It's kind of like, does this parse TSV files, like tab separated values rather than comma separated values? Maybe this is closer to that format. And it turned out that basically led me on a path to the solution, right? So I have a workflow that actually goes and gets things into my system. It's not completely automated at this point in time. But it's like, I had to basically notice that TSV was a format that could be generated by, a particular institution and just sort of like say, well, that's sidestepping a problem. Do I really need CSV? Well, no, there's other things that are available to me. Now, how would AI solve that problem, right? It would have to have full access to the environment that you're working in to go and see that that was an option. And depending on the AI system you have, some basically give like desktop, access and all these different things. And it can basically go and sort of reason from the goal and say, hey, there's another way of approaching it. But I think that that particular thing of going and saying, I've invested too much in this, this can't be the right way. Maybe there's a simpler way. Let me go ahead and look around and see what's available. I find that just a very useful orientation. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the fundamentals of garbage in, garbage out haven't changed. I think that's the thing. It's like you're are you're either going to be good at expressing intent in a programming language abstraction or English, right? And I think that's kind of the secret sauce now ever has been thus. But yeah, cool. Pivot over to the next one. Or we can pick and choose if you want.
Yeah, we were talking about second order effects, I think.
Yeah, we can talk about
Or
that.
the second order effects of, introducing AI into an organization.
Yeah.
Um,
So what's the second order effect? I mean, maybe we should kind of just normalize on that. Seems kind of basic, but yeah.
yeah. So essentially, like there's the effect that you want to have. And then basically it's kind of like once that effect is achieved, it's kind of like it alters the situation in such a way that basically other things become issues, right? So that can be seen as like a second order effect. And, we're seeing all this kind of stuff right now, just basically what is the role of juniors in an organization, right? Does this basically sort of like lean against their hiring, what will be the balance between very senior developers and junior developers and stuff like this? It seems like the thing I'm noticing also is a second order effect, that's kind of interesting to me, is just basically because there's a push for productivity, we're just basically starting to lean on lines of code again, right? And it's kind of like, maybe it turns into token usage. Like how many tokens does this developer use when they're, doing their work in order to go and sort of assess things? And it's, it comes back to this fundamental problem that essentially it's like the thing that provides value in software is not these quantitative phenomena, really. It's the value judgment about what needs to be done, and getting it done, right? Selecting the right problem quite often is a big deal, and the right solution, as I was talking about a little bit earlier. So that's where the real, gold is, I think, for a lot of these things. So of course, we're going to go through this hype cycle and then basically cases where, Goodhart's law kind of like comes up. It's kind of like you set a particular goal, and then it's kind of like you end up with that particular metric, but kind of missing the mark, on the thing that you wanted to achieve. So, some things are evergreen, I think, in the industry.
Yeah, I think the junior dev problems are maybe a little bit overstated. I really like what this guy Dan Shipper, who has his company Every, which is essentially like a content company. They have a couple of products that are like more B2C type products, but they're a really interesting company. They have a daily newsletter around AI usage. It's really good. People should check it out. It's helped me kind of understand like what is going on with AI. But he had, I think it was listening to him on Lenny's podcast, and he had a pretty good summation saying like it's really not like a senior junior problem thing. It's more of the way you come at the technology thing, right? And of course there's like going to be human in the loop moments, but the way they're structuring their team is they're putting a senior and junior programmer in proximity. And in the in previously in a previous incarnation, we would reach to something like extreme programming and pair programming, or in mob ensemble programming or whatever, to try to level those skills out and kind of rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing. But these two developers they're working their own agents, and they're just kind of constantly checking in with each other, and they're checking in with an AI ops role, and they're kind of sharing best practices and prompts,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. And in doing that, it's a very similar mechanic, I think. Like it's like essentially you have someone going off and doing their own thing, but they're not fully on their own, right? They're being supported in some way with someone that maybe has a little bit more restraint, keeps the LLM on a shorter leash, I think was his analogy, and stuff like that. So, I mean, I just kind of feel like it's almost like, instead of, for me, the best practice or the good practice was always like a really social team that's highly collaborative, that often pairs and works together, real-time code review. We don't need all this like, crazy branching strategies. We don't need all this elaborate, apparatus and tooling stuff, because we're just constantly kind of scrutinizing each other's decisions. And as a result, progressing, really quickly. I think there's an analogy or an analog with this AI stuff. I just think that that's the innovation space, is like how you do that. So I kind of pay attention to what they're doing over there at Every. But yeah, I do think there will be a short-term second order effect, is that it is very possible to create a lot of code that you don't understand really quickly. And just to compound that, and if you give into the delivery, devil, I guess we'll call it, for lack of a, it's really easy to just generate a bunch of stuff you don't understand, aka tech debt, kind of form of tech debt.
So it's not a new problem at all, is it?
No, it isn't. But I wonder, I kind of think like, I feel like when that problem's out, that it's just going to go faster, right? You're just going to create it faster. Which is, probably good for a lot of CTOs that are only stick around for 18 months or 24 months in a job role. But I think, I feel like there will be a whole other class of software that is around patching that problem. Essentially, going from generation to refactoring, or going from generation to, like already now Claude Code, I've used this several times where it says like, you go into a forward code base and you say, explain this to me, what's happening, and it's pretty much a, radical accelerator, right? For kind of understanding what's going on, so,
It rewards good questions, right? And if you're paying attention, you get better at asking questions. I like that,
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I think, I feel a little like I'm not so paranoid about the job loss. I think there will be job loss, and there certainly is already some of that, but I think like it just seems like, at least for the next few years, you're going to need some human in the loop around these kind of decision making things. And that's just what programming will become, is that,
Makes sense.
I'm not too worried about Skynet just yet, but, you know,
I'm not either.
but,
And I think that, one of the things that's really kind of like, can I say infuriating? I don't really mean it that extreme, right? But it's kind of like the number of people that I encounter who want to go and create the big thing, right? And we talked about this a little bit earlier, kind of like a bit more like a waterfall process. Like, here's a giant markdown file that has everything that we need to know, everything that we want from this particular system. Go to it, right? And the tools are getting better. It's sort of like going and creating sub goals in order to go and actually, achieve things like this. But, at the end of the day, it's kind of like when you have that thing that's created, what do you know about it, right? Even if it generates tests for it, it's kind of, there's this thing, if you understand something, it's because you were there for the journey, right? And you were actually involved in some of the thinking process in creating the thing and comparing it to alternatives and such like that, right? So, to the degree that we sort of value that kind of thing, um, it's nice to basically take things in smaller chunks. And I just tend to lean towards that in my practice. And I feel like that has to be learned over and over again, in the industry. And maybe we get to a point where we generate a lot of, what we need, but I think because software is being developed for humans, right? Generally, it's like you always need somebody to go and sort of like figure out what's suitable, and that interaction is really the thing where we learn, it's yeah, I'm kind of, scared of descaling, right? And I think, a lot of people are, but I guess, it's like maybe we just go and reuse that analytical skill someplace else. Let's see where it goes. I think we
yeah,
can still do it in code quite a bit.
for sure. I mean, I find that, and again, take this with a grain of salt, because again, most of my, uh, prompt engineering is aimed at qualitative writing tasks,
Yeah.
and mainly business writing. I still handwrite everything we put on our newsletter for the record, and like I do think there's some things that's really important that I do the writing and think through and struggle with it, and hopefully come out the other side. But like, for business stuff, generally, all my most successful prompts all are few shot prompts. They all have examples, right? They're all like, I've been kind of putting them in XML, like embedded in the prompt, and
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, this is exactly what I'm looking for as a good outcome." And those are by far the out of the couple dozen, use Claude projects. They're essentially system prompts, the instructions that you put in there. Those are my most successful ones, have those examples. So I really think that evergreen wisdom, like when maybe Brian Merrick, who's agile testing dude, functional
Yeah.
programming
Yeah.
dude, Brian, and he's
Mhm.
like, an example would be handy right about now. I think that's pretty, I kind of try to stick to that wisdom as well. But
Yeah. I took a journey from like trying to go and actually specify a refactoring I wanted an LM to do to just realizing that examples work, generally. And it's really kind of a nice thing to notice that, because I kept thinking it's like, the thing I want to basically sort of, it's going to do something concrete, but I want to basically do it in two different contexts. And I need language to go and describe what it should do. And, that's kind of like, it was fun analytically, but then I realized that examples kind of get you there, and it's good.
nice. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good section. Why don't we move on to skill?
Yeah.
So what in this big change, because it's a big change, what skills do you think remain evergreen? We talked a little bit about like examples of Be Handy or breaking the problem, sidestepping the problem, but like what skills do you think kind of stick around versus what's really changing in the development landscape? Like what is like just going away?
It's hard to see very much right now. I guess a lot of it is boilerplate is going away. Maybe that's the thing to go and sort of like, use as a frame for this. The part of an application or a system where it's not terribly critical, it needs to be there, it's not the core of your business, that kind of thing. I mean, it's still going to need, inspection, testing, stuff like that to some degree, but it's kind of like, I think recognizing that, and basically sort of like, figuring out where that should be at, architecturally. And I think there still is this space where architecture and design is very valuable for us because, we have to make value judgments. And it's kind of like AI just isn't great at going and understanding implicitly what values you should have in a particular context. It can make a guess, right? But, we need to basically make decisions all the way along as we're designing things. And I really feel that, for the time being, at least, humans need to be involved in those decisions. So yeah, I think that's the thing, value, right? It's kind of like, this thing of, okay, well, you were doing like an MVP, you were talking about a while back, right? In that system. And just, very quick throwaway type thing. But it's kind of like, what is that for this particular system, right? It's kind of like separating the wheat from the chaff, I guess, kind of understanding those things. So I think that's necessary in understanding how that stuff expresses in design and architecture. So
Yeah, it feels like design and architecture hasn't doesn't has LLMs haven't benefited from the same amount of training inputs that they have in coding that they it as in design and architecture, right? Like I think about the story. I think it's this choreographer Twyla Tharp, and she revolutionized the world of choreography because essentially before video, there was no way to really document what a choreography was, right? To say this is Bob Fosse and this is how it goes, and you had to
yeah,
have the actual human show up and do the thing, and people mimicked and did the dance, right? And video was then became the encoding format for choreography. Right. So now we could record it and we could distribute it, we could scale it, and people can, do different kinds of dances. I'm not an expert, terrible dancer. It really takes a lot of alcohol before I will even hazard that. But I
cool.
did hear the story, and it kind of feels like that with architecture and design, in that there isn't really a um a unit of there, a standardized unit of documentation. There's no GitHub for architecture, right? There are repos that have ADR, architectural decision records, and they're good READMEs that have C4 diagrams and stuff like that, but there's
Yeah.
no and I know people trying to change this, but there's no like fundamental unit of architecture or design.
Mhm.
It's so subjective, but we all know good one when we see, what I mean? Like we know good from
Yeah.
bad
Yeah. There's
through
that.
through just experience and stuff like that. So it feels like those domains are more, um, you know, there's a more of a moat, human moat, around those.
Yeah. And, it makes me kind of wonder too. It's like, because when I was describing earlier, I didn't want to make it into something like that, like, here's the place for humans, that kind of thing, but it's, I think, yeah, I agree with you. I guess the counter to this might be that, like, diagnostic things, LMs are able to do wonderful diagnostic things based upon, radio scans and stuff along these lines. And I think sometimes in ways that basically doctors may not be able to recognize because such deep training has been done on, these kind of artifacts that they can put things together that we can't necessarily sometimes, right? So I feel like that's kind of where things might go with this at some point. And then you're looking at something that's been generated for you, say in architecture, for instance. And then the question is like, okay, yay, AI, you created this thing, but I got to live with it, right? I got to basically live with the decision that was made here and basically modify this thing over time. And because of the criticality and the amount of money involved, really, in going and maintaining something that could be slightly off to the side of what it needs to be in 5 years or 2 years or whatever, I think that's kind of the thing. And then, just us basically applying yeah, so it's the same thing. I'm cycling back around in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think there's two different, sides to this, and they're both active and in play.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that is one of the holy grails of good architecture is like kind of, I know Michael Nygaard was calling it maneuverability for a while, but I think like essentially like reversible decisions and like being able to flex and change in architecture. Like, there's all kinds of good thought leadership out there around like, being able to like club microservices together into a more cohesive unit for cloud costs or performance. But like being able to kind of make those ongoing decisions is a feature of the medium, but it's really still hard to do. Like maybe that's, I think, uh, a really good use case for AI in
Yeah, and
architecture is
maybe
kind of,
starting to ask about reversibility. It's gonna be interesting to see where, things go with this. It's like, so I know Michael Nygaard, and it's kind of like, it's funny. I was telling him the other day, I said, I was just playing with an LLM, and I said, it's kind of like, how would Michael Nygaard have designed the system? And it gave me an entire, list of things to do, and it was kind of fun. And
really.
it's, yeah, and it's kind of,
Yeah.
and it's, I mean, it's not deep analysis, but it's kind of like, it'd be good to go and try that with different personas around the industry, and just to get different perspectives on the things that you happen to be working on. But I think sometimes we forget about that a bit, and I think that's one of the things about AI that's kind of, bedeviling, I guess, is that if we use it just as a coding tool, like I ask you for something, you make it for me. That's not the rich conversation that can go back and forth with these things. And it's also like it gets away from the fact that you can just basically do freewheeling questioning. And the role playing thing is just quite useful. I just sometimes forget to use it. And it's nice to know that, like, a tool like Claude Code, there's nothing that's really clamped down that I'm aware of, in the sense of, hey, that's not a programming question, it's out of bounds, right? You can ask it, who was George Washington, and it will tell you, right?
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, so getting used to the thing of seeing, the vast amount of, subject matter that you're able to go and converse with it about, and hypotheticals. I think that's where the meat of this is.
And now, so at the time we're recording this, this is the Claude has kind of recently announced the sub agent feature, and so you can basically go and create like all these little subsystem prompts in whatever folder, working directory, repo, whatever. And the classic use case is, oh, there's the project manager or the product manager and the developer and the QA engineer and the data scientist, and you kind of create this little cross-functional team is the kind of use case.
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder about doing an experiment of creating like prominent architecture people, like the feathers, like
Yeah.
agent and because you have a strong POV. Nygaard has a strong POV.
And Kent
Uh,
Beck, just
Kent
like
Beck. I mean,
Mark
I would throw
Fowler.
Adam Dimitrick in there just
Hmm.
because he's so, foaming at the mouth about event modeling.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it'd be kind of interesting um, make a little architecture review, team of rivals kind of, there's obviously overlap between some of you, but,
Yeah. There's
um,
something I heard somebody say a long time ago that was kind of interesting. It's like, if you ask the question, will AI be smarter than people? Right. And the answer is no, because we'll never admit that. It's kind of like, so it's like, you imagine you get that committee together, and it basically goes and comes up with a design, and you look at it and you're kind of like, I can do better than that. It's like, it made this decision, but I'll make this other decision, because there's things it just doesn't really know, and it's like, it's the human inherent ego, that we have sometimes, that might, kind of like, keep us questioning, which is probably useful, for us.
yeah, I think that, kind of smartest person in the room is very much a stock character that you run in pretty frequently in the software development world. It's something I had to outgrow, and it's certainly a benefit of being a part of community is realizing that, oh no, you're not the smartest person in the room by far.